For most of my life, I felt like a stranger in my own home. I'm a 20-year-old man named Ethan, and I'm the older brother, only a year older than my sister Emily. But you wouldn't know it from the way things worked in our family. From the outside, we probably looked normal, but behind closed doors, it felt like we were living in two different worlds. Emily was born with physical disabilities and chronic health issues, and her life revolved around hospitals, therapists, and ongoing medical care. Emily was born with a physical disability and chronic health issues, so her childhood was a haze of doctor's appointments, therapies, and ongoing medical concerns. I understood why, but as early as I can remember, my parents did everything they could to make her life easier and lessen the edges of her pain, which meant I was expected to take care of myself a lot. My parents always made special time for Emily, planning things that could accommodate her limitations, which takes a lot of time and energy, I know, but it left little room for anything else, including me. When Emily and I were younger, I remember getting excited about family outings, thinking maybe this time we'd all go together, but more often than not, I ended up staying with a neighbor or getting dropped off at Aunt Linda's place. They would always say, "We'll bring you next time," or "It's just easier if Emily doesn't have to travel too far today." Those next times for me seemed to never come. It wasn't just the trips, though. They always picked something that would suit Emily's needs, which I understand she needed more care. I think the first time I truly experienced the hurt of being the forgotten one was on one of my birthdays, which must have been my 8th or 9th. There was no special dinner or party, and I woke up thinking maybe they had a surprise planned, but the entire day passed with nothing happening. They took Emily to a concert, which she had been looking forward to for months, and it just so happened to fall on my birthday. They returned, talking about how much fun it was and how great the show was, and I just sat there feeling so invisible the following day. As we grew older, this pattern didn't change. It was always about what Emily needed, and I was expected to understand to not make a fuss. I spent a lot of time alone or at friends' houses, wherever I felt a bit more seen. I remember for one year that I was turning 10, double digits, which is a big deal for any kid. I'd have been hinting that I wanted to do something fun as a family, maybe go to the local arcade or have a pizza party. They tried to make up for having missed my birthday by giving me a $5 gift card they had picked up at the last minute. I went to school that day in the hopes that my parents would remember and perhaps surprise me when I got home. But as the day got closer, I could tell that nothing was planned. There were no rumors of secret plans, no hidden gifts around the house. And on the morning of my birthday, it seemed like everyone. I nodded that it was okay, but it felt like any other day. They said we would make up for it that week, but plans fell through again, and instead of going out, we ended up watching some of Emily's favorite movies. My dad got her a cake, one of those pre-made ones from the grocery store, but it was almost an afterthought, a consolation prize rather than a celebration. This pattern wasn't new. It was just more of the same. Another year, another forgotten celebration. It wasn't just about the party or gifts. It was about feeling appreciated and like I mattered too. However, every birthday that was missed served as a reminder that, in the big picture, my place seemed secondary. By the time my 12th birthday arrived, I had lowered my expectations and stopped hinting and asking for anything because it was easier to avoid hoping for something that would never happen. I spent my birthday like any other day, doing my homework, playing video games, and helping out around the house. My parents did remember to wish me a happy birthday this time. At least there was a quick hug and a brief acknowledgement before things returned to normal. Emily had a doctor's appointment that day, so most of the attention was focused on getting her ready and out the door. I believe that was the birthday that hurt the most, not because there was anything special. As I grew older, the disappointment began to solidify into something else: resignation. I stopped expecting things to be different. My friends' birthday parties were a glimpse of what it could be like with parents who planned and celebrated their kids' birthdays. It wasn't just birthdays, school accomplishments, hobbies, or anything else I was proud of. They were so accustomed to putting all of their energy into Emily's needs that it didn't register on their radar. The warmth of those festivities, and then returning home to my reality. In therapy, when we began going a few years later, one of the therapists pointed out that these missed moments were important. They weren't just minor slips, they were patterns that revealed where the priorities lay. I tried to point out in those sessions how these patterns made me feel unimportant, secondary, and my parents listened, but they always had an explanation for why things had to be the way they were. They promised to try harder to be more conscious, but it's difficult to break lifelong habits. Looking back, I can now see how these early experiences shaped my expectations about life and my place in it. My grandparents were the unsung heroes of my childhood. With my parents busy with the never-ending cycle of managing Emily's health issues, they filled the void. They didn't do anything extraordinary, but in my world, they were a beacon of normalcy and warmth in contrast to the cold at home. They taught me not to ask for too much and not to expect too much so that I can't be disappointed. But they also taught me about the kind of parent I want to be someday. Someone who remembers, who celebrates each child for who they are, not just what they need. Grandpa, on the other hand, was the quiet strength of the pair. He loved model trains, and the basement of their home was devoted to his elaborate sevs. He was a man of few words, but he had a presence that made you feel secure. During these cooking sessions, she would share stories about her childhood and the mischief she got into with her siblings. Whether it was her famous chocolate chip cookies or something as simple as spaghetti, I loved it. The days I spent there were the days I felt most like a kid, not just a bystander in my sister's life. They celebrated every report card and every little accomplishment that my parents frequently overlooked. When I scored my first goal in soccer, Grandma made a cake, and Grandpa put up a small display in the living room with the ball I used in the game. It wasn't just about the trains, though. It was about sharing something he loved with me that wasn't overshadowed by the constant worries that hung over my family. Grandma's illness 3 years ago wasn't sudden. Rather, it was a slow decline that seemed to parallel the gradual fading of my innocence as a child. Her vibrant energy dimmed, and the kitchen, once the heart of our interactions, grew silent. I watched helplessly as the disease took hold, turning our cooking sessions into brief, strained visits where she would mostly sleep while I sat by her side holding her hand, missing her even though she was right there. When she passed away, the funeral was a blur, with a procession of people offering their condolences and expressing how wonderful she had been. I nodded and thanked them, but inside, Grandpa changed after Grandma passed away, and I felt as though someone had taken away the core of me. The spark that had been in his eyes when he showed me a new train setup or told a joke faded, and the basement gathering stopped altogether. He mechanically went through the days without joy. The model trains accumulated dust, and our conversations became stilted. It wasn't long before it was decided to move him to a nursing home in another city because the house was too big and too full of memories for him alone. I understood the reasons, but it felt like another anchor was lifted, leaving me adrift again. My buffer against the loneliness at home was gone, and the transition back to a world where my sister's needs dominated was harder than ever. The contrast was stark. Where my grandparents had made me feel seen at home, I was more invisible than before. The routines continued. Emily's needs continued to shape our family life, and I continued to fade into the background. Regular visits turned into monthly trips that were more about making sure he was okay than sharing anything meaningful. Instead, I would sit in the sterile visitor room and engage in small talk with him, avoiding the gaping absence that Grandma left behind. Even at school, I started to withdraw. Friends would invite me to hang out, but I found myself declining more often because it was easier than explaining why I was feeling down or why I didn't feel up to pretending everything was okay. Of course, they knew about Emily, but no one truly understood the full weight of living in her shadow, of having my needs and desires constantly sidelined. Conversations would revolve around Emily's latest treatments or her challenges, and I would chip in where I could, trying to share bits about school or friends, but it frequently felt like speaking into a void once they left my lips. Emily didn't choose her health issues, and I knew my parents were doing their best under difficult circumstances, but knowing that didn't make the sting of neglect go away or fill the growing void inside of me where familial warmth once resided. As I adapted to this new reality, I realized that I needed to locate new sources of support and ways to feel valued. I turned to coaches, teachers, and any other adult who might offer a word of encouragement or a moment of recognition. Each small nod felt like a lifeline, a reminder that I could be more than just the other child. Looking back, losing my grandparents not only signaled the end of my childhood, it forced me to confront the imbalance in my family head-on and begin looking for ways to establish my own identity in space, apart from the family drama that had long defined me. Sibling rivalry is common in most families, but when your sibling has special needs, the dynamics can change drastically. The term rivalry doesn't even feel right. It's not like we were ever competing on the same level. Emily's needs always came first, which I understood rationally, but emotionally, it was a completely different story. It all came to a head one evening that initially felt like any other. It was a rare moment of relaxation in a home that frequently felt more like a revolving door of therapists and medical crises. Emily was having a rough day. She was in more pain than usual, which made her irritable and moody. My parents were trying their best to console her, but nothing was helping, so she threw a fit. This wasn't the first time she had a tantrum, but this time the controllers flew, the gaming console crashed to the floor, and the game I was playing disappeared into a screen of static. I was stunned, just staring at the remains of my only real escape. When I turned to my parents for support during the daily stress, hoping that they would finally understand the impact of Emily's actions on me, all I received was a hasty apology as they gathered her up to calm her down. They cared more about her tears and the reasons behind her outburst than the fact that she had destroyed something important to me. The message was clear. Emily's immediate needs came before any of my feelings or possessions. That night, after Emily calmed down and everyone else appeared to move on, I was left with a broken console and a growing resentment that could not be eased by any amount of silent brooding. It wasn't just that Emily came first, but that her needs seemed to be the only ones that mattered. It wasn't her fault that she was in pain or that she had limitations, but why did that mean I had to be the one always left behind? I tried to brush the incident off, but the frustration simmered, and I found myself snapping over little things and withdrawing further into myself. My parents noticed, but they mistook my mood as just a phase or school stress, suggesting that perhaps I needed more sleep or should try talking to someone like a counselor at school. It felt like another dismissal, another way of implying that my problems weren't as serious. I wasn't sure what to anticipate when I first proposed family therapy, but I was desperate for anything that could help us communicate better. To my surprise, my parents agreed. Perhaps they noticed that things were becoming unmanageable, or perhaps they thought a professional could help patch up the growing cracks in our family dynamics. In any case, we ended up sitting in a sterile, quiet room across from a therapist who seemed genuinely interested in hearing from each of us. Although therapy sessions were meant to be a place where we could all improve our communication and understanding, it soon felt like we were merely going through the motions. The therapist encouraged us to openly discuss our feelings, which was a new and uncomfortable experience for everyone. I talked about how it felt to be an outsider in my family and how painful it was to have my needs and interests constantly ignored. It was freeing to express these feelings and have them recognized by a professional who didn't immediately dismiss them as typical teenage concerns. My parents, who were eager to make amends for their past neglect, initially threw themselves into the process with a sort of desperate energy. For a short time, it seemed like we were making real progress. To put these good intentions into practice, we started implementing more structured family time. It was decided that once a week, we would do something as a family that didn't revolve around Emily's medical needs or preferences. Although it was a small concession, it meant the world to me. The first few times were awkward, but also kind of nice. We went to movies, museums, and even spent an afternoon bowling, which had nothing to do with Emily's medical condition. Their actions, or lack thereof, had affected me deeply. There were tears, apologies, and promises to do better for a moment. Emily noticed the change in focus, though, as she had become used to being the center of our parents' universe, and the abrupt change triggered a deep-seated jealousy. It began with lighthearted remarks about how much fun we must have had without her or how nice it was for her to have some quiet time at home. The underlying message was clear. Emily felt left out and wasn't happy about it. The situation quickly escalated during what should have been a peaceful family dinner, and Emily broke down, accusing our parents of ignoring her and forgetting about her needs in favor of spending time with me. Her reaction was intense, driven by a combination of real fear of being excluded and a behavior pattern she had developed over time. My parents, caught off guard and overcome with guilt, fumbled to reassure her and apologize for making her feel that way. The backlash was immediate, and our planned outings became fewer and farther between, and when they did happen, they were overshadowed by the tension of Emily's displeasure. My parents were caught off guard and struggled to balance their newfound commitment to me with their strong sense of responsibility for Emily's emotional and physical well-being. It was a difficult balancing act, and little by little, things began to return to how they had been before. The therapist, to their credit, pushed back, pointing out that this reaction was exactly why we were in therapy, to break these unhealthy patterns, not to reinforce them. So we continued with the sessions, each one getting more charged than the last, with Emily's feelings of abandonment and jealousy becoming a central theme. Much of our time was spent addressing her fears and insecurities, making it feel like we were going backward by focusing on her, even in a space that was supposed to be about everyone. During a particularly heated session, Emily made a shocking accusation that our parents favored me over her and that they loved me more because I was the normal one. The accusation hurt and sent our parents into a spiral of self-doubt and confusion, and they reassured her at times at the expense of their emotional well-being and definitely at the expense of the progress we had made. It was a painful cycle to watch and even harder to be a part of. I started to feel like the villain in my own family story just for wanting a small amount of the love and attention that came so easily to Emily, and I found myself withdrawing once more from the therapy sessions and from my attempts to be more present in the family. What was the point if it only made things worse? The tipping point came when my parents, trying to manage Emily's growing distress, suggested that we all see a different therapist who might be able to provide a fresh perspective on our family's problems. but I saw it for what it was, an attempt to appease Emily and possibly find someone who would tell them they were doing the right thing by focusing so much on her. I felt defeated by all the talks, sessions, and promises of change, all of which seemed like empty words that would be quickly blown away by the first sign of conflict. I was emotionally and mentally exhausted from the constant tug of war for my parents' attention. It seemed like no matter what we discussed in those sessions, the outcome was always the same. Emily's needs overshadowed everything else, and my feelings were just side notes that were acknowledged, but never really addressed. I pulled away, resigned to the status quo where Emily's world was the only one that mattered, and I was just living in it. Finally, during a particularly tense therapy session, we were all seated, and the breaking point came when we were all sitting there. I had prepared myself to speak openly that day to lay out how I felt because I needed them to understand the depth of my isolation within the family. I took a deep breath and started talking. I didn't just skim the surface with general statements about feeling left out. I went deep and shared how hurt I was that my accomplishments and family dynamics were not balanced. The therapist had been trying to help us achieve this, but the efforts felt futile. The air was awkwardly thick with unspoken frustrations. Milestones felt ignored. My birthdays felt like days on the calendar to them, and I felt more like a roommate than a son. The room was silent as I spoke, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like it's holding back a storm. My parents appeared shocked, possibly unaware of how much their actions, or lack thereof, had affected me. But Emily nevertheless appeared agitated, shifting uncomfortably in her chair as I expressed my feelings. When it was their turn to respond, the reaction was not what I had hoped for. They were defensive, beginning with an apology as they always did before, but soon moved to defend their behavior, discussing the complexity of Emily's health issues. The therapist intervened, trying to steer the conversation back to a constructive path, but the damage was done. The air was thick with hurt feelings and accusations, and I felt a mix of anger and despair. They said that their needs weren't just preferences but necessities and that they were doing their best under difficult circumstances. Afterward, Emily spoke in a shaky voice, accusing me of trying to make her feel guilty for things beyond her control and of being selfish for wanting what she saw as equal attention. The session ended with a tense agreement to keep trying because my parents were too focused on being Emily's caregivers, and Emily herself wasn't ready to see our family as anything other than centered on her. However, as we left, I realized that something had changed for me. The glimmer of hope that therapy could help us come to a better understanding had vanished. I was done fighting for attention and trying to explain my feelings to people who couldn't seem to understand how important they were. Over the next few weeks, I withdrew and spent more time alone, concentrating on school and my interests outside of home. My parents noticed but didn't seem to know how to bridge the gap between us. They made hesitant attempts to connect by asking about my day and weekend plans, but it felt hollow, like too little, too late. Emily also noticed my withdrawal, but her response was conflicted. She seemed relieved to have the spotlight squarely back on her, but she also showed tentative curiosity about my newfound independence. She asked me about my activities a few times, and there was a flicker of interest in her eyes, but we were both too scarred from previous conflicts to open up again. As the weeks turned into months, my plans for the future started to take shape with greater clarity, and I realized that I needed to find my path, one that didn't involve waiting for my family to understand my needs. So I began looking into universities, scholarships, and programs that interested me. I put all of my energy into creating a life where I didn't feel like a supporting character. My relationship with my parents remained strained, but we spoke, shared meals, and lived under the same roof. There was an unspoken understanding that things were different now, that they were focusing on Emily and were being more cautious with me, possibly out of fear of starting another argument. My parents suggested changing therapists again, this time in a more urgent manner, as they were hoping that a different viewpoint would heal the wounds. I declined, telling them that it was too late for new beginnings in therapy because the ship had sailed, and I was already looking toward new horizons. They were disappointed, but there was also a resignation in their acceptance that they had missed too many opportunities to make things right. I wasn't angry anymore, just resolved to move forward and build my world where I was more than just an afterthought. After I moved out and reduced contact with my family, things started to feel more like mine. I wasn't just the older brother who was always pushed aside by my sister Emily's needs. Instead, I was living my own life in a new city, making my own rules. The decision to create distance wasn't simple. The family is family, after all, and I needed time to figure out who I was. At first, the quiet was strange because there was no background noise of Emily's needs or the chaos that usually surrounded them. It was just me and my thoughts, which was both frightening and liberating. I found a small apartment and a job that I didn't mind and began creating a routine that was all mine. When my first birthday arrived after the move, I wasn't expecting much. Maybe a call, if I was lucky, but the day passed without any calls or texts, and it hit harder than I had anticipated. It wasn't like I wanted much, just a reminder that they remembered me outside of Emily's world. I ended up spending the day by myself, thinking back on everything that had happened up until that point, and it served as a sobering reminder of why I had distanced myself. I chose to ignore it without a fuss instead and used it as motivation to invest more in my new life. I began making excellent friends who came to me. Little by little, I started to feel like I belonged to a community again, where I wasn't just the other kid. The following year, I approached my birthday with a new perspective, not checking my phone for missed calls or messages from home. Instead, I planned a big night out with my friends, went to a couple of bars, laughed more than I had in years, and celebrated until the early hours of the morning. It was unquestionably the best birthday I'd ever had, and for the first time, I wasn't an afterthought but the main event. Later, my curiosity overcame me, and I called home to confirm that they had forgotten once more. This time, there was no apology, just a straightforward discussion of how things were going with Emily. It hurt a little, but it also strengthened my resolve that I was doing the right thing by keeping my distance. By the third year in my new city, my birthday had become something I truly looked forward to. So I threw another big party, this time even bigger, where we rented out a space, had a DJ, and invited close friends. It was at this celebration, surrounded by those who cared about me, that I truly understood the gravity of what I had built. The call from home was brief and unemotional, a stark contrast to the warmth and joy of my celebrations. It confirmed that although they were my family by blood, my real family was made up of the friends who supported me. The difference in these relationships was clear, with my friends who never just remembered my birthday, but made it special. They didn't just listen to how my day went. They were a part of it. I had been missing out on all those years again, and this time I didn't even bother to bring it up. We helped one another through job changes, breakups, achievements, and disappointments. We created a network of respect and caring for one another, which is something I've always wanted but haven't fully experienced with my own.